So welcome. Looks like we're ready to go. We'll do the same as we've done in the other classes. We'll go ahead and discuss, we'll lecture per se on the slides. At the end, we'll leave some time for question and answers. We'll do a 10-minute break, and then we'll go to the exercises. And at the end of that, we'll do some more question and answers and then a little more discussion. All right, so here we go. So today, we're our final day. We're at manifestation beyond the third logos. But first, we want to do a recap. There we go. All right, so the first day we discussed the cosmic perspective, the law of correspondences, where man is the microcosm, or the thinker is the microcosm, and the universe is the macrocosm. So as the thinker is so, then all the hierarchies of the heavens exist within him. But in truth, there is neither macrocosm nor microcosm, but one existence. And that's kind of been the underlying theme. We get going into manifestation, into separation, duality, multiplicity, but then we come back to, but all is the one existence. The keys to interpretation was another important part. This is where there are 7 keys of interpretation to every symbol and allegory. And this is our key to understanding or taking the secret doctrine and making it personal in order to become more impersonal, I guess we'd say. Okay, then the next day we covered the absolute. This one absolute reality antecedes all manifested conditioned being. This infinite and eternal cause is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is the omnipresent reality, latent in every atom in the universe, and is the universe itself. So this is another key that we need to remember as we're going through, that we use words and categories and clarifications and demarcations, but we're really talking about aspects of the absolute. The 3 logoi. The first stage is the appearance of the potential point in the circle, the unmanifested logos, or the first logos. The second stage is the shooting forth of the ray from the potential white point, the second logos. The third stage is the production of the first triangle, which is the third or manifested logos. In other words, the subject and object, the subjective and objective universe. And then this is a little prelude for what we're doing today. Further, from this manifested logos will proceed the 7 rays, which in Eastern occultism are called the primordial 7 rays. Thence will proceed the innumerable series of hierarchies of celestial beings.
So this is a quote from Blavatsky doing a little summary of what we saw yesterday about the logoi, and what we are going to see today, that is these 7 primordial rays or beings and the manifestation that comes through them.
So this is just another overall review of where we ended up yesterday. So we now perfectly understand the absolute. The first logos, the unmanifested. Remember that even though it looks separate, we're still in an undifferentiated, homogeneous state. And then the second logos, Swavabat, or as you say, Swavabat is what's in the secret doctrine, but the true word is...
Yeah, Swabhava, without the T at the end. Just for those who are interested in the Sanskrit
right,
and all that.
Right. So then the second logos is that bridge between the first and the third. And then we come down to the third, which is the manifested cosmos. And we have our triad, our cosmic ideation, Mahat, or what we'll see as spirit, cosmic substance, Akasha, cosmic energy, Fohat.
Yeah. Within the theosophical tradition, since you mentioned Swabhavat or Swabhavat, some theosophists make a difference between the two, and that's perfectly fine, you know, if one chooses to do so. At the level of Sanskrit scholarship, the word Swabhavat with the T at the end is nowhere to be found in Sanskrit literature. Of course, Sanskrit is a dead language, but we can trace it in literature. So that word Swabhavat with T at the end is in no scripture. There is David Regal traced and Daniel Caldwell, they traced the history, or trying to see where this word came from. And well, there are some theories, but some theosophists use that difference to point to different aspects of this principle. Same with Atman and Atma. Some people would make a difference between the two. In Sanskrit, there is no real difference. It's just a difference in the grammar, the declination of the word. And the way that I see HPB used it, I don't see that she made a systematic difference. But, you know, if you are going to study the secret doctrine, these things may be useful to be aware of.
Okay, so from the third logos, the manifested cosmos, the cosmic ideation, Mahat, cosmic substance, Akasha, and cosmic energy, Fohat, we have the manifested triad, spirit, matter, and energy. And that's kind of where we left off yesterday. All right, the manifested triad branches off and divides into the 7 cosmical principles and 7 human principles.
So this is, again, we go back to HPB's quotes here. So this is the essential idea. We saw that within the absolute, within the zero, let's say, the one appears, then the one gives rise to the two, then that the two polarities and the relationship between them is the 3. And now Blavatsky says that from the 3 come the 7. So first, why the 7? Why not 5 or 4 or, you know, whatever other number? So we will look into that. But this is an essential theosophical teaching that from the manifested triad, we have 7 differentiations of different things, of the cosmic principle, human principles, hierarchies of beings. We'll see a little of that.
The third logos is the synthesis of the 7 creative rays, the 7 logoi. From this manifested logos will proceed the 7 rays, which in Eastern occultism are called the primordial 7 rays. Thence will proceed the innumerable series of hierarchies of celestial beings. And if we remember that table, we saw that from number we had the 0, the 1, the 2, the 3, and then we had the 7, 12, 30. So that's where we're starting, is with the 7, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
Yes, notice that Blavatsky, do you want to say anything about that?
No, I'll just finish when you're finished.
Okay, so Blavatsky talks about 7 logoi. Logoi is the plural for logos. So 7 logos is, 7 logoi. And that these are she calls it the primordial 7 rays. So there is in theosophy this teaching about the 7 rays. And in Blavatsky, she would talk about the 7 rays as being these 7 primordial celestial beings that we are going to see. And from these 7 primordial beings come all the hierarchies of beings, including human beings.
Right, and so the other names you might see in the Secret Doctrine are the primordial 7, the first 7 celestial beings, the 7 logoi, the 7 planetary spirits, the 7 creative rays, or just the 7 rays. And so this, these 7 celestial beings are the nursery, and we saw some of this, I believe, yesterday, but are the nursery for all our monads or divine spirits. And divine sparks, sorry. And they develop from each one of these celestial beings. But I know there's a lot of study or on the 7 rays, which ray are you, which ray, am I? And just so for just a little clarification, our monad or our divine spark is a ray, comes, manifests, emanates, transforms from a specific ray. And, but each of our principles emanate from another ray. So just like we said before, all the principles are within the thinker, so are all the rays within the thinker.
Mhm. Yes, that's something in later theosophists would talk about the rays as more applied to perhaps our personality or our higher ego, our higher manas. The way Blavatsky and Subba Rao, for example, talked about the 7 rays is that the ray belongs to the monad, or let's say the opposite. The monad belongs to one ray. If I say I'm second ray, that would mean that my monad is second ray. And Subba Rao said, we can never know what ray our monad belongs to until we are an initiate, basically. So then, of course, because there is all this analogy, we could talk that the personalities we incarnate into, and Blavatsky talks about this. So let me backtrack a little. As Michelle said, our principles, Blavatsky says, come from these different divine primordial beings. So the emotional body is made of the essence of one of these celestial beings. The mental one is made of the essence of another of these primordial 7. So we have all the influence of all these primordial 7 beings within us. To what extent, in what combination, how strong is the influence of one or the other? This is all part of what astrology tries to depict in the
Make
astrological
sense of
system.
or categorize.
Yes. So we could say that the personality is this particular personality. One of the rays is stronger, is dominant. So we could say this personality.
As we go down, we see that the 2 levels have more spirit. Then beneath that have more energy.
The middle
2
region
has more energy, and then the lower region has more matter. So, and we can see their correspondences to the principles. The physical body and the ethereal double have more matter. The vitality or prana and kama, or the passional nature, have more energy. And then the human soul, manas, or the spiritual soul, and the spiritual soul, buddhi, have more spirit.
Yeah. So in the diagram, whatever you see first is like more predominant. What you see last is least predominant. So this is a nice diagram to show that these are all possible combinations of the 3 aspects: spirit, energy, and matter. These are all possible combinations. You cannot combine them in any other way. So you see that we have the first one that is like the white light, where they are all in equilibrium. And then as soon as you start combining them, you have 6 more combinations. Thus, we have the 7, which Blavatsky says many times is the 6 plus 1.
Yeah. So you could go on from there, and I have in this plainness that Pablo mentioned, and you could put in, not exactly, but you could put in the bodies, or the energies, or the celestial beings, and you can see where some are more spiritual, some are more material, some aspects are more material. But we have to remember, and I'm reminded all the time, that these examples or these correlations aren't always exact. So if we hold them tightly as truths, then we're going to run into some trouble, because I think more and more as we look at the secret doctrine, it's something that needs to be held gently and allow for the space for other things to come into it.
Yeah, always remember that we are trying to describe all these things with clumsy words in very limited ways. On the higher planes, things are, or a principle is many things at the same time. It's not like here on the physical plane that is far more limited and concrete. So there is a conversation between Blavatsky and some students where HPV said in one place that talked about Alaya as the highest principle, and in another one is the second highest. And the students asked, how come? And then HPV was trying to explain that. Well, all these things are fluid in the sense of they depend on the perspective that you are taking. And it's not that you are changing this willy-nilly. It's that it depends on what perspective, from what point of view. The first logos is unmanifested from the perspective of manifestation, but from the perspective of the absolute, the first logos is manifested. It's different. It's the beginning of the reawakening and differentiation. So all these things, as Michelle says, has to be taken, lightly, and try to approach it with the higher mind that sees general patterns more than with the lower mind that is exclusive, is either or.
The 7 primeval gods or angels, our celestial beings, are formless at the upper rung of the ladder of being, materializing more and more as they descend in the scale of objectivity and form, ending in the grossest and most imperfect of the hierarchy, the thinker. The former, purely spiritual group is the nursery and the fountainhead of human beings.
Mm-hmm. So if we go back to the other, to this diagram, you see nicely what Michelle was pointing out, that the first 2 planes, the spirit is more predominant.
So this is what Blavatsky was talking about, formless.
Yeah, more formless.
More formless. And this she calls, sometimes you'll see the celestial breaths.
Yeah. And then if instead of the principles there, you would put
that's what I meant.
Yeah, the celestial beings, you would start first with the logos, and then as you go down, you get denser and denser manifestations of beings, the human beings being at the bottom because we are physical. Blavatsky always said, we are celestial beings. We are the monads, and the monads are celestial beings, but we are a particular hierarchy of monads that at this point in evolution, it needs for its further development to experience life from the physical limitations. So we are a hierarchy of celestial beings that is expressing on the densest of planes. So we would be there at the bottom, which is what HPV said in the next diagram, quote that we just read.
The 7 principles, which correspond to the 7 distinct states of consciousness, are allied to 7 states of matter and 7 forms of force. And we saw this yesterday. So from spirit, we have the various states of consciousness. From matter, we have the various planes of matter, or we could also say the various vehicles from which consciousness will work through. And from energy, we have the various forces of nature.
So now we can say that these are 7, basically, again, the 7 first differentiations are the basic differentiations, but then each one of them undergo more and more differentiations following different patterns, so that we come to the physical plane. There is a multiplicity of many things. It's not that everything is by 7, but whenever you get to the root of something, then you get to 7, or at least that's what the theosophical literature proposes. So there are 7 basic planes, 7 states of consciousness. There are 7 forces that Blavatsky calls the 7 sons of Fohat, for example, etc.
All right, so now we're going to speak to cosmic illusion. So HBB tells us that it's an illusion for 2 reasons. One, because it's temporary. So we are on the plane of illusion because we are temporary beings here in a temporary space. And also because it's literally an illusion because it comes from, our perception comes from the senses. So anything that comes from the senses is of an illusory nature.
Yes, in philosophy, they talk about many times about noumena and phenomena. Phenomena means appearance. So there is an awareness in philosophy, and of course with the development of science, we can understand it better, that there is a difference between how things are and how things appear to us. So a typical example that we repeat often is colors. We think that there is a curtain that is red, and we think that that curtain is red. Now, what do you mean by the curtain being red? You think that the atoms are painted in red, or that the molecules are painted in red. The curtain is just a group of atoms. Atoms are just basically energy, bottled up energy that has no color. The light that, we see it red because there is light that comes to our eye, and that light is an electromagnetic wave, or you can see it as a photon. The wave is not red, the photon is not red. Then it goes to our eye, it produces a electrochemical reaction that generates the nerve current. That nerve current is not red. So it goes to our occipital part of the brain, it stimulates certain neurons. Nowhere is red there. But in our consciousness, this series of electrochemical reactions appear as red. And that particular structure of atoms and the light bouncing off that particular structure that will retain certain wavelengths and then shoot or bounce off only one wavelength that we call the red light, which there is no red anywhere. But that particular structure, that particular wavelength, the way that our senses work, interpret all that in red. A butterfly has, I think, can see like 12 colors. And so that is red for us is not red for a butterfly. And we see these colors because there are three kind of cells in our eyes, the cones, that detect color. The butterfly, I think it's not that it sees 12 colors, it has 12 cone cells. So all this to say that but it's important to realize it, that whatever we see with any of our senses, the same apply to sound, the same apply to taste, to all the senses. Anything that we see is not out there, is how our system decides to picture it to us. Because no molecule has smell. It is when the molecule interacts with, in our nose with the cells, that our brain decides to interpret that as a certain smell. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, the tree doesn't make any noise. There is only air that is, produce this I don't know what you call it, but a disturbance in the air, which has no sound. Now, the moment there is a ear there, that air will trigger all these, little bones in the ear and all that, and then our consciousness turns that into sound. So everything we see is an illusion in the sense of appearance, because it's how our body chose to represent reality. It's not reality.
So what we see, what we hear, what we think is all determined by the mechanical parts that we have. So if something's wrong with the bones in my ear, I don't hear what you hear. So so I might say, well, that doesn't exist. I don't hear a dog barking, so there is no dog there. But he hears that. So there has to be a part of us, because I've heard Pablo give this explanation many times, and I always kind of, half tune out, because I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. I can't think about my eye not seeing red or not seeing blue. But when we bring it's a good background. So I realize that it's a good background for what my senses do, and what my senses bring in are only as good as the receiver that I have within me. So, and we can see that in our perceptions. We can see something that something is done, and to me, it's not a big deal. To somebody else, it's a big deal. To somebody else, they didn't even see it. So all these, once we realize the noumena that you're explaining, that produces the phenomena that we experience, once we understand that behindness of it, then we can start to kind of distrust or at least question what comes in to us through our senses.
Yeah, this has a lot of implications, spiritual implications. Of course, we can't do anything about it as long as we are on the physical plane. We see the world through the physical senses, and that's what the physical senses bring. But as Michelle says, we need to be aware that the way our senses present to us the world is not how the world is, and it has a lot of implications because, for example, scientists are aware of this, of course, and they say the brain has developed not to present reality to us. It has developed with a very specific purpose, that is to make your body survive. So when the brain shows, what the brain shows you is separation, is opposition, is all these things that to ensure that you are not going to be eaten by a lion because you perceive the unity behind. So the brain is designed to show you what is the basis of our materialistic conception of the world. So if you fully believe the brain and the brain's perceptions, you are a materialist. So even though we may not at the physical level, as we are going to see, Blavatsky says, we can go beyond that illusion, but then you have to perceive on higher planes. As long as we are on the physical plane, we all perceive the same. But whether we believe the brain or not, what the brain brings, is very important. And not only a question of belief. Normally what happens is that our spiritual intuition begins to bring a different kind of information that is more as a feeling, where we start feeling that, sure, what the brain is bringing is not the only reality. Some other people have no input, perhaps, from the higher nature, and they just believe whatever the brain says.
So not necessarily right or wrong, more just you have more information from which to make a decision on, or than if only your senses.
Yeah, but we have to be aware that the senses bring an illusion because we are constantly fooled by our perception, physically and psychologically, as Michelle said. Our mind also does not reflect reality as it is, especially while we are in the process of evolution. It brings a distorted aspect of reality. That's why our mind makes stories about what happens out there that many times has nothing to do with what is really happening. So it is very important to realize that we are perceiving things not as they are, but we have the possibility of perceiving things correctly.
The 6 principles in nature on the plane of manifestation and form are all the variously differentiated aspects of the 7th principle. So here we just show that again, the 7th principle and all its differentiated aspects, which here are the 6 principles. The 7th principle is the only reality in the universe. Therefore, the psychic, spiritual, and physical permutations of the manifested logos, the vehicle of the unmanifested, are viewed by metaphysical reversal as illusions.
Yeah, antiphrasis.
Antiphrasis
means
like a reversal. So what it appears like on the metaphysical perception from a metaphysical point of view is reversed to what it is down here as an illusion.
Yeah, so our senses say this is a reality, where from a metaphysical point of view or a spiritual point of view, it's the opposite, it's the reverse. For a materialist, will say, I don't see anything that you can call the soul, spirit. So that's an illusion. This is a reality. From a spiritual or metaphysical point of view, is the reverse. What we see is the illusion. What we don't see is the reality.
And the analogy I always use is, here right now, I only can see what's in front of me or what's to the side of me. If I'm able to take a bird's eye view, then I can see the whole picture. And from there, I have a whole different world of information from which to act on.
Mm-hmm. So here Blavatsky, yes.
No.
So here Blavatsky mentions these 3 permutations, these 3 transformations or expressions of the highest principle, the 7th, psychic, spiritual, and physical, which we can see in the table.
So reality is that higher,
Yeah, that would be the third logos that she mentions there.
and then the illusion, the spiritual, the psychic, and the physical. So we have to remember too that the physical, the psychic, the spiritual, this is our level of experience. This is when we're experiencing things. And sometimes we take those experiences as the reality or what it really is, where in meditation, for example, that reality is beyond any of the experiences that happen.
Yeah, so you see the physical is where matter predominates. The psychic would be where energy is more, predominant. And then the spiritual planes or region would be the second and third there, if we count the white one as the first one.
Which seems weird or odd to say that, the spiritual is still an illusion, but anything outside of the absolute reality is an illusion.
Yes. So again, this is all relative, within the 7 manifested planes, the ultimate reality would be the third logos in it as a synthesis, as the white light. Now we could put this also taking into account the whole, even the absolute and the unmanifested logos. Then we would say that the only reality is the absolute, and then those 6 planes would include the first, second, third logos. So always remember this is like a fractal, and you need to see in from what position you are looking at this. But yes, this is saying that Buddhi is an illusion. Of course, it is an illusion if you compare it with Atman, with the universal self. It is a momentary expression, a transitory expression of the universal self, but it's far more real or far more permanent or far closer to the nature of Atman, clearer than the physical body, for example.
For although the root of every atom is the 7th principle or the one reality, still in its manifested phenomenal and temporary appearance, it is no better than the evanescent illusion of our senses. Thus, even the creative God or the aggregate gods are regarded by the Eastern philosopher as false apprehension. And this is what we just talked about, that it's relative. Subjectivity and objectivity is relative depending on the point of view from which you're perceiving or looking from.
So here, even the highest God is an illusion in the sense of, because the true reality is what is behind all the gods. Again, if we limit ourselves to the manifested planes, the only reality is the white light, the third logos, and all the 7 primordial beings, as divine and sacred as they are temporary or limited manifestations of the white light. So even the highest gods are, comparatively speaking, illusions.
So I just have a quick question. So you keep saying the white light is the third logos, which is what we talked about. But following this subject-objective thing, the first logos is an illusion compared to
the absolute.
The second logos is an illusion compared to the first.
Exactly.
More, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're talking now about manifested, but you can bring it up to the other logoi also.
Yeah, Blavatsky would say, if you want to include all the planes, you actually have 10 planes. The first 3 are the absolute and the unmanifested planes, and then the lower 7 are the 7 manifested planes. And you can play with that. Again, you can think of these 7 planes as being just the manifested planes, which is what we are doing. We are talking about manifestation. We could include 3 more for the second logos, the first logos, and the absolute, and then you will have the 10 that Blavatsky talks about. But we could also take the 7 to include all the logos. There are different ways in which you can adjust this without being self-contradictory, just because of this quality of the fractal quality, that we call it. So when you read The Secret Doctrine, you have to always keep the context in mind.
From what point of view you're reading from.
Yeah, or from what point of view Blavatsky is
Yeah.
talking, is writing. Sometimes she would talk about the third logos as the, demiurge, which is a Greek word, is the creator. And sometimes she will talk about the demiurge with high terms and held in high regard. And then sometimes she will talk about the demiurge as being a limited God, a flawed God, etc., etc. And you say, how come? But in one context, she was taking the whole 7 manifested planes and was talking about the third logos as we are now. In the other context, she's taking only the physical plane. So the demiurge of the physical plane, or the physical manifestation of the demiurge, is far more limited. So you have to, because of this quality of the fractal quality, you have to make sure where you are positioned when you are looking, when you are reading the Secret Doctrine. From what point of view is she talking? And I think this is part of why she said the Secret Doctrine is written in a way to stimulate your intuition. You cannot go just by your lower mind and take this word means this and is unequivocal, and it always means this. And that's why it's so difficult for many of us to read the Secret Doctrine until we learn how to approach it. And that is not, talked often enough. That's why
Right.
I wrote this book,
Right, so it's a
Approaching the
new
Secret
skill.
Doctrine.
It's a new skill that we're learning for our brain. And what you're talking about, context is really important. Context of words, context of where she's coming from. But also we have to think about that when we read other theosophical authors. It's kind of like each book is its own universe. We have to understand from what view in this universe is this author coming from? What words are they using that might not be the same? So if we start with Blavatsky, that's our reference. Or if we start with Besant, that's our reference. But that's not always a good way to look at it, that we have to get just to what is Besant talking about.
Yeah, a true theosophist learns all this on the inner planes by direct perception. We are repeating teachings we study, we may have our own perceptions, we repeat them, but we are learning from, words. A true theosophist, in the sense of theosophy as the divine wisdom, and a theosophist as one that has direct access to the divine wisdom, perceives all this without words, beyond words. So when that theosophist brings down that information into the physical plane and chooses words, there is no, there is no reason why that theosophist, or we could expect that theosophist to use exactly the same words for everything. Like the two of us can go to a city, to Paris, and come back and describe it in different ways, even though we both were in the same city. So you can expect that in theosophical literature. That's why this is not a dogma, and this is not a doctrine in the sense of, written down and set it on stone.
So that theosophist you're talking about doesn't get those powers by paying dues every year?
No,
That's not a different theosophist?
That would be a member of the society, and if that member works hard, little by little becomes a little more of a theosophist.
All right. So illusion is an element which enters into all finite things, for everything that exists has only a relative, not an absolute reality. Since the appearance that the hidden essence, the noumenon, assumes for any observer depends upon his power of cognition. And this we kind of talked about.
Yeah, that's why we said the appearance of the universe depends on your own power of cognition, or on your own senses, on your own mind, etc. It's not out there, it's in here.
Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are for the time being our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities. And the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, but only when we shall have reached the absolute consciousness and blended our own with it, shall we be free from the delusions produced by illusion.
Mhm. So here is what we said, as long as we are on the physical plane, that's our reality. We are using our physical senses, that's our reality. Now, as we rise in the scale of development, as she says, and we start perceiving more on the inner planes, then that begins to change. Now, what do we mean? Again, this question that is important to keep in mind. What do we mean by perceiving on the inner planes? There are two answers that can be given. One is actually developing, let's say, astral senses and seeing on the astral plane. And then you will see a completely different reality. Things look different on the astral plane. That is one road. The other is perceiving from the astral planes simply means that your higher conscious from the inner planes, that your higher consciousness begins to be able to influence the brain. And this happens not necessarily in ways of images that you see or anything like that. It's a growing certainty that the spiritual realities are true. This is what we call spiritual intuition. It's a feeling that you take the physical plane, the things that happen on the physical plane, the things that happen to your personality, little by little are less important. They are seen from a wider perspective. So that would be also perceiving more from the inner planes, even though you are not seeing objects on the inner planes.
All right, now we go into the evolutionary pilgrimage.
Yeah, because here, let me say something as an introduction. So there is a difference, again, between the theosophical view of illusion and the traditional Eastern view of illusion. In Hinduism, Buddhism, traditionally, there was the idea, whatever is up there is the real, I'm making it easy, and all this is illusion. And because this is an illusion, what you have to do is to get out of the illusion. The illusion has no specific purpose in itself. There was in traditional Hinduism and Buddhism, there is no concept of a principle that evolves. This is why Blavatsky, when she started talking about spiritual evolution, and she was the first person that we know of, and I don't mean me, I mean humanity, the first person to talk about spiritual evolution. Hindus attacked her. They said that's not Eastern teachings, and she had to resort to allegories in the Puranas and say, well, all this teaching of spiritual evolution was hidden in the Hindu literature, but it was never really spoken openly. When you introduce the idea of evolution, then the sense of the illusion changes completely. There is a reason for this illusion. It's like you are put in a virtual reality where you are going to develop some skill through the virtual reality. The virtual reality is not true. It's not your true life, physical life, but there is something you will learn. There is something you will develop. So all this cosmic illusion there is set up by the Logos, let's say, for the purpose of the evolutionary pilgrimage.
The secret doctrine affirms the eternity of the universe in its totality as a boundless plane. Periodically, the playground of numberless universes, incessantly manifesting and disappearing. The appearance and disappearance of worlds is like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux. This is the absolute universality of the law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow. So we start out with affirms the eternity of the universe in its totality as a boundless plane. This is the absolute. This is going back to the unity. So I'm sorry, this is the second fundamental proposition that we're talking about here. The obligatory pilgrimage is the third fundamental proposition. And we saw them in one of the other classes, that it usually starts with a unitive nature to remind us that it's coming from the unity. And then periodically it comes and goes, cycles within cycles, all right? But this is the absolute universality of the law of periodicity. So this law is universal. No matter if you believe it, no matter if you know it, it still is in working order.
Yeah, so this pilgrimage, which is what we are going to focus on, is in the context of a cyclic pilgrimage. There are cycles of evolution. That's why the second proposition is there. We are not going to go into the cycles because we don't have time, but that's also an important topic to apply to our daily life, but we don't have time for that.
Just realizing the cycles,
Yeah.
realizing that
there are physical, emotional, mental cycles, spiritual cycles, political cycles, etc.
Right. Okay, we have a few more slides and then we can do questions.
Yeah.
The process has been going on for all eternity, and our present universe is but one of an infinite series, which had no beginning and will have no end. At each new period of activity, the cosmic organization may be regarded as the first and the last of its kind, as it evolutes every time on a higher plane. And we said Manvantara is that period of activity.
Yeah, or manifestation. So these cycles are not merely repetitive. You always are in the same route. Every time, every new cycle is on a higher plane, she says.
So it's more like a spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Or what did you call it? A helix?
Yeah, spiral would be on 2 dimensions.
Right.
It would be a helix. You know, we normally say spirals in theosophy.
Moreover, the secret doctrine teaches the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root, and the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul, a spark of the former, through the cycle of incarnation or necessity in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. So this here, the third fundamental proposition, starts once again with the unitive nature, where everything is coming from, this unknown root.
Mm-hmm. The unknown root would be the absolute, the universal oversoul would be Alaya, and all souls are one in Alaya. And Alaya is just, as it says, they are an aspect of the absolute.
So so this isn't a lie, this is in the absolute. This isn't down to the first logos where we have homogeneous and undifferentiated. This is before that.
This what?
This, where you're saying the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect.
Yeah, the unknown root would be the absolute, the oversoul would be later.
Right,
yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
And that's why she mentions next Buddhi, because Buddhi is the 6th human principle, which is a ray of the 6th cosmic principle, that is Alaya, or the oversoul.
A celestial being has to become a thinker. He cannot be born or appear suddenly on the plane of life as a full-blown angel. Nothing comes into manifestation perfect.
Yeah, so again, the idea is that evolution implies that you have to little by little work out in developing something. So celestial beings start as elementals, become human beings, and then they become disembodied celestial beings.
Through the whole kingdom of nature.
All the kingdoms
of nature.
All the kingdoms of nature.
Yeah. No purely spiritual divine soul can have an independent conscious existence before the divine spark, the monad that we've been talking about, has. 1, pass through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that period of activity, which we just talked about. And 2, acquire individuality.
Mm-hmm. So here the third fundamental proposition hints at one of the major aims of evolution, that is attain independent conscious existence. So from an unconscious unity, we come into conscious separation, and then we go back to a conscious unity.
This journey happens first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychosis metempsychosis, and reincarnations.
Yeah, so that, we won't go much into this. The idea here is we will work more with the idea of evolution, of illusion, but illusion in the context of evolution. Because when we say the physical plane is an illusion, your personality is an illusion, we don't mean they don't matter, you should get rid of them. We mean we need to look at these things from the right perspective, and you will see that they have a place, they have a role, they have their own importance. The problem is when we think that they are all important and we lose the perspective. If we come from the right perspective, then we can understand how they are relatively an illusion, but they are important too. That's why they are there.
And the other part of this is where she says, first by natural impulse. And we can see this in our daily life with anything we do. When we start on the spiritual path, we all have stories of how kind of something just appeared to us. But then there's a time that we have to provide our own effort to keep it going. And that we do with creative ideas or any creative manifestation that we have.
Yeah, and in the context of all the kingdoms of nature, it refers to, the pre-human kingdoms evolve by nature, and then in the human kingdom is when we have to participate more willingly, consciously. So that's why it says first by natural impulse and then by
that's the
our own
evolution.
efforts.
So there's that natural evolution that goes through the kingdom of nature. And then in man, there's a natural evolution that starts, but kind of, as she says, self-devised, self-induced effort to become more spiritual.
Yeah, and then those efforts are transcended because we become the universal mind. We become the universal will.
The celestial hierarchy of the present period of activity will find itself transferred in the next cycle of life into higher, superior worlds, and will make room for the new hierarchy composed of elect ones of our mankind.
So that basically is saying again, the cycles of evolution are to produce manifestation on higher planes. The celestial beings of this Manvantara will be higher celestial beings in the next one, and the human beings in this cycle of evolution that have accomplished all the evolutionary aims will become celestial beings in the next cycle.
Okay, all right. So that's all we had for the morning. Sorry to speed through for the first part of the morning. We added the pilgrimage because we thought it was important. So
that the illusion doesn't stay just as an illusion, a worthless illusion.
Okay, so we have a couple questions.
Okay, we do. From Ed, if Fohat is the relation or bridge between mind and matter, is it identified as energy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Blavatsky sometimes calls it cosmic energy, but she says, I think we read one of the quotes, that Fohat is the origin of all the energies that we see here on the physical plane, adhesion, electricity, magnetism, etc. So Fohat would be the energy.
Right, and so that's the energy that comes out of splitting a duality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like in the atom,
yeah,
you have positive and negative. When they are together, the atom is neutral. When you separate the electron, then you generate electricity. So that's what she's saying. The duality generates the energy that would be a manifestation of Fohat.
Okay, from Gwen. Are the seven rays consciousness sequential in their understanding, both philosophically and sensorially? Will that add to the illusion rather than to the reality? Can we go back and forth through the seven states, for instance? If we are pondering our silence, can we get to one state and then lose it? And lose that state when we become active? Do we ever lose it, or is it the driver of energies throughout the day?
Well,
in 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, but yes, but basically, when we say we lose it, all we are saying is that we lose sight of it. It's not that it was there and it disappears, but we may lose sight of it. So yes, in our effort to perceive from higher perspectives, as we grow, as we evolve, sometimes we touch a higher perspective, but we cannot sustain it, and then we lose it. But that produces a change in our consciousness. Eventually, it becomes easier to touch that higher perspective. We lose it again, but then it becomes easier to get there. Then as time passes, that higher perspective begins to be our normal perspective. And now it's more rare that we lose it, although we may lose it. And eventually we can, we position ourselves there and we basically don't lose it, but then there are higher perspectives to that.
And we do that with our daily life along the spiritual practice. We gain equanimity and we lose it. We gain a little more equanimity and we lose it. And someday, they say, we will be poised in equanimity.
Yeah, but also the degree to which you lose it begins to be less and less.
Right, right.
So yes, the spiritual life is very fluid, and it's not just a straight line. And there are cycles also. Sometimes you do great with something, and then you come into the descending arc, and you seem to lose that ability. And it's just part of the cycle. Then you will regain it if you continue to work.
So if we keep in mind the helix, not the spiral, not the circle, but the helix, we do come back to the same point, but we come back to it as a higher place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from Fiona. When we rise through the planes of consciousness, does our memory fade about the lesser level? Or are we aware of our own growth, or is it too gradual?
Mm-hmm. Again, there are different ways to raising our consciousness on the inner planes. If we can raise it with maintaining self-awareness, well, basically, we don't lose the memory of what happens in the lower planes. When we go to sleep, we are aware on the astral plane. And on the astral plane, we know everything about what is going on during the day. But if we are spiritually inclined, many times from the astral plane, we regard things that happen on the lower plane as non-important, even when we come back to the physical plane, we forget that perspective, and then something becomes all important again. Normally, from the higher planes, when we look down, we regard that as a little thing, as something that doesn't really matter, but then we tend to forget it. As the higher nature becomes more and more active and can transmit that perception, even if as an intuition to us, then we retain that sense. It doesn't really matter,
Okay, from Susan. I like when you speak of Fohat as love.
Mm-hmm. Yes, HPB does speak, because again, Fohat can manifest on the different principles. On the physical plane, the main manifestation of Fohat is electromagnetism. And we know electromagnetism brings things together. On the emotional plane, it manifests as desire, as the desire to bring things together. Then on the Buddhic plane, it manifests as love. So it has a manifestation on all the different planes.
Okay, from Fiona. Is fertilization of an ovum regarded as Fohat?
I don't know. I haven't thought that analogy. Perhaps we could. Perhaps we could. Yeah.
Because there's movement, there's energy that's needed in it.
Yeah.
So from a simplistic view, or
Yeah, it could be maybe the motion.
Yeah.
Like in the stanzas, some of the stanzas show the ray fecundating the mother, and that ray is like the pre-Fohatic principle, because we are still in non-manifestation. So perhaps we could do that. But this is what we need to do. Blavatsky would encourage us to try to look at different things in the world and on different planes from these points of view. Can you see the analogies? And maybe you see one analogy that another person doesn't, because again, this is fluid, but your higher mind may be perceiving some pattern there.
Flavored by our personality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's
Okay.
it? Okay, great. Then we will take, let's take closer to an 8-minute break. So we come back at 15
after the hour,
or
or
45.
if you are in
or-
India.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, welcome back. It looks like we're a go.
Mhm.
And we'll start from cosmos to man. Oh, no, we won't.
Yeah. So remember the main theme of today, and we will see in the exercises, is the illusion. We added the cycles and
Pilgrimage.
evolution just to put the illusion in context. We could do a full class on cycles, a full class on evolution, which all this is described in the book, but we don't have time to present all. So we added the last part just to put the illusion in context, but now we will work on the illusion.
Address that
aspect.
specifically. Okay, so in this diagram here, we've started with the cosmos, which we're familiar with, the absolute, the first logos, the second logos, and the third logos. And then what we've added from there is the multiplicity. So the Fohat, astrolight, and the physical.
So we are showing here the 7 planes, that are the manifestation. And as I was mentioning before, in this case, we are seeing all the principles from the absolute to the physical within the 7 planes. We could also show this with 10 planes. It depends where you are standing, what your perspective is.
So we've seen the human constitution of the first part. So with the absolute, its correlation is the higher self or Atman. First logos were the spiritual wisdom or Buddhi. Second logos, higher mind or Manas. And this here, the higher mind or Manas, remember the second logos is the bridge. Let me go back. So spiritual wisdom is the unity. It's a homogeneous state still.
And that's why Buddhi is the plane of unity, where you perceive the unity.
And it's a universal.
It's a universal principle.
So then we come to the second logos, and remembering that it's the bridge where there's that polarization, not a duality, not a separation, but a polarization. And in any of the literature we read about the higher mind or Manas, we see that the mind itself is not separated. It's not a duality unless we live or we're attached in the lower.
Yes, the mind as a principle is where duality is introduced, because the mind is the one that brings the sense of I and what is not I. But at the level of the higher mind, there is no separation. At the level of the higher mind, you perceive other things that are not you, but you perceive them in a certain sense as extensions of yourself. It is on the lower mind where that polarization that was within the unity now is separation. And with the lower mind that is operating like right now, we see things separate from us.
Differentiated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the third logos, the lower mind and Manas. Fohat is the passional nature or Kama. Did you want to jump in? And then the astrolight, and the astrolight is Blavatsky's words.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And then that's the astral double or the etheric double.
Mm-hmm.
And the physical is the physical body. So then we go to the right in the diagram, and we see that the 3 higher principles that correlate to the 3 higher aspects of the cosmos are what constitute the higher mind in the individual. So we've gone from the whole of the constitution to specifically the mind.
Yeah, that's why we always say, this is like a fractal thing. So now we are taking, what if we compare the whole cosmos with only the mind? And the way in which correlations would work is as you are seeing them in the diagram.
So the 3 higher principles correlate to the higher mind or the higher triad. We've all read it that way before. And then the four lower ones from the third logos on to the physical all make up, correspond to the lower mind, which is called the quaternary, the lower quaternary.
Yes, so it is said in theosophical literature that the higher mind has 3 subplanes and the lower mind has 4 subplanes, and you see it reflected there. So again, if in meditation we are dealing with our minds, when we are working at the level of duality, we are working from the third logos down. This is where duality and manifestation comes. So when in meditation we start transcending duality, we start going into the higher mind. So as we said yesterday, there is a state in which there is the duality, but there is no reaction to the duality. There is this disengaged awareness. Then you are coming into the polarity, where there are the 2 poles, but they are not still separate so that you react to it. So when we start in meditation working with this disengaged awareness, you begin to be on the lower plane of the higher mind. And then as you go deeper into the unity, etc., you are ascending through the higher mind. So you see that the same patterns can be applied to the mind, to the whole human being. We could do this also to the physical body, etc.
So I just want to read a part from the book. We can see that, which says just what you said. We can see that for any action, the first 3 states are always the same, as they are the basis of the manifested personal self, the manifested cosmos. All the diverse actions, feelings, and thoughts take place on the 4 lower levels. This is a reflection of the cosmos, where the 3 higher planes are eternal and the lower 4 are the planes of successive planetary chains.
Yeah, so it is said that the higher mind is the eternal soul in us, and the lower mind changes with each incarnation, and the lower mind is where, you know, diversity and the transitory thoughts come and go. So that's another correlation.
Okay, now we go to a separate set of correlations. We still have the cosmos, but we've added the passive third logos, the active third logos, and the creativity of the logoi. So the key word, this is using the stanzas from The Secret Doctrine.
So
Do you wanna go?
we need to give a little background here. So in The Secret Doctrine, you have 7 stanzas in the first volume, and each of the stanzas, Blavatsky says, the stanzas are like a formula, a mathematical formula that describes the different stages in evolution. So we can summarize each of the stanzas with keywords. You know, what's the main point in the first stanza, and then in the second, and then in the third. That's what we have done here, where it says keyword from stanza. The first stanza talks about the absolute, and we could talk about the unmanifested aspect. The second stanza talks about what is the reawakening, and that would be the seed of consciousness, for example.
Do you want to go straight across?
Wait, let me do it like this, and then we go across. So the keywords that we are choosing here are adapted to the third column that we are going to see. We can give keywords all related, but with different flavors depending on how you want to apply them. So these will be applied to look at with the psychological key. So the third stanza talks about when the third logos appears before it begins to build the cosmos. That's why it's the passive third logos. And that can be interpreted as the manifestation of consciousness. Then the fourth stanza is about the celestial beings and the activity that will begin. So that would be the activity of the universal mind. Then the fifth stanza talks about the creation of all the planes, preparing the planes of matter. The sixth is about building the solar system, the planets, etc. And the seventh is about the evolutionary journey. So the experiencing within that field that was created, the reaping of the experience.
So we can see that the first four are all unmanifested when
The
you look
first
into
three.
relation
How
relation to the last three.
yeah.
So the activity of the universal mind obviously is more manifested than the previous ones. So that's what we're looking at here. So these last three are, as we can see, as I say, you can have a thought, but you can't put that thought into action until you have the right wording per se.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so let us start from the top.
right. So then the absolute, the unmanifested in the stanza correlates to what Blavatsky calls conscious non-consciousness. And this is the action of our mental state in each of us.
Yeah, we saw this when in the previous classes, when correlating the absolute with Atman or with the highest in our mental state would be that conscious non-consciousness, the cloud of unknowing, you know, that state. So that would correlate to the first stanza.
So the second stanza, the first logos, correlates to the silent sense of I amness. So it's not I am, as we'll see it's in the next one, but it's that I amness, which is similar to the beingness that she talks about.
Like a pure sense of being that, again, we described yesterday, that as you raise your consciousness, when you get out of duality, you get to this pure sense of being that correlates to the first logos.
And then the passive third logos, the manifested consciousness, is I am Mr. Smith. So now we've delved into the individuality, that this is me now.
Yeah, instead of pure being, now we are limiting, we are manifesting in a particular personality. I am so and so.
And so the active third logos, the activity of the universal mind, and this is what I was talking about. The thought is, I am hungry. With that in itself, there isn't a lot you can do. But as that thought manifests more, it manifests into, I want to eat.
Yeah.
And then we can have the creative activity from there. So you have to gather the ingredients, you have to start cooking, you have to start eating. So we can use this creativity of the activity, we can use that in anything that is created.
Mm-hmm. So using here, this is again a way to show you how the stanzas which describe manifestation could be also applied to
manifestation of the cosmos.
Yeah, could be applied to the manifestation of any action in a human being. You have the basis, you know, of in our mental states, the bottom, the basis, the ground of any mental activity is this conscious non-consciousness. Then if you are going to act, the first thing that comes into mind is the sense of I am, the sense of being. Then it comes the limitation, the labeling, I am Pablo.
So first, right before that, that's still within the unity.
Yes,
the silent sense of I-ness is still the unity. Then we come out into, go ahead.
Yeah, I am Pablo, for example. Then comes the perception of things that happen to Pablo. For example, I am hungry, I want to eat, or all the thoughts. This would be like when the universal mind begins to be in activity. Then the next stage, if I'm going to eat, I have to gather the ingredients. That's what the universal mind does when building a cosmos, and that's described in the fifth stanza. Then you do the cooking, that's described in the sixth stanza, when you actually use those planes that were developed to build the cosmos. And then the eating would be the experiencing or the reaping the results of the building. So there is an analogy there. And again, the first three states are relatively eternal, you know, as long as there is a Manvantara, the three first states are there, the absolute first logos and the passive third logos. And the four lower is where all the diversity and movement happens, which is again the level of our thoughts. We can have different thoughts, we can have different actions. The first three, conscious, not consciousness, the silent sense of being, and the identification with the personality is always the same within any lifetime.
So when you talk about I am Mr. Smith,
Mhm.
you are talking about, because you said relative within the Manvantara. Okay, but it's not I am Mr. Smith throughout the Manvantara.
No,
It is I am this, I am this, I am this.
in a
I am
human
this.
being, the Manvantara for the cosmos would be a lifetime in a human being. So within this Manvantara that is our lifetime, this particular lifetime, I am Pablo throughout this lifetime, as the cosmos is this particular third logos throughout the Manvantara, that is the cosmic life. So you see how you can, do these correlations again.
These are the cycles within cycles, or the
In the next
concepts within concepts.
In the next incarnation, you will have the same conscious, non-consciousness, and silent sense of I amness, which would manifest in a different personality, in a different third logos, let's say.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So again, this is just to show you how to use the psychological key to interpret even the stanzas. So, the Blavatsky says this is a formula for the manifestation of the cosmos. Well, not only that, this is a formula for the manifestation of any activity from you. And this is how you interpret it using the psychological key.
Okay, so now we've taken the cosmos, the keyword from the stanza, and correlated it to the stages of human life. Do you want to just go ahead and go through it?
Yeah, so that we do it faster.
Yeah.
So here again, we are applying it in a different way. The other one was applied to mental activities, mental and physical activities. Now this is applied to different stages that we go through in human life. So the unmanifested would be the soul before incarnation. The seed would be during the fecundation and pregnancy. The manifested logos, when in the third stanza is the birth of the manifested logos, obviously that would correspond to the birth of a human being. The fourth stanza, when the universal mind begins to develop, that would have to do with the awakening of intelligence in a child, little by little. Then the fifth stanza, that is when you start preparing the ground to build the systems, you can apply it to the preparing for life, gathering all the instruments or tools and knowledge that you need for your life. That would be the youth. Then the sixth stanza, that is the building of the systems, that could be correlated to the building of your family, career, etc. And the seventh, the experience or reaping of the experience, would be maturity. So again, you see there how what Blavatsky says, all these stages are universal stages that can be applied in different ways.
All right, now we'll go to the exercises.
Mm-hmm.
The main cause of pain lies in our perpetually. The main cause of pain lies in our perpetually seeking the permanent in the impermanent, and not only seeking, but acting as if we had already found the unchangeable. So keep this in mind, because this is kind of the basis from which this particular exercises that we're going to go through.
Yeah, this is HPV, and we are going to look into the illusion. Remember that all manifestation, ultimately speaking, is an illusion.
For two reasons.
Yeah.
For one, that it's temporal,
Mm-hmm.
that it's
transitory.
Yeah, transitory, and the other that is it's coming from our senses. The perception of it is coming from our senses. So
basically, she says pain. In the context of illusion, pain is because we cling to that which is temporal, that which is transitory, and we expect it not to change, and that is the cause of suffering. So as long as you don't understand that in the realm of illusion, you won't find the permanent, then you will not find happiness, because things keep changing.
Okay, the first exercise is working on our desires. Be aware of an instance in which you cling to something which is impermanent in hopes of attaining lasting satisfaction. And we can do this with big things, and we can do this with small things. We can do it with attitudes that we're hoping that our children will maintain. That's a really easy way to see that it's ever moving, ever changing. And then even within our moods, we can watch our moods or our feelings or our thoughts and see that it's a constant ebb and flow.
Yeah, so it's important, again, we may study the secret doctrine or theosophy just as a theory, a philosophy out there, and it's a first step. It has its own importance, but then we have to start looking at our daily life and see how this is true, whether this is true or not, so that we can determine by ourselves. So is this true? Well, this is an exercise. Start looking at instances in your life where this may be happening, that you are longing for something, and what's your expectation? And what happens when you get it, and it may maybe satisfy you for a while, and then it ceases to satisfy you, whether because you got bored, because the thing broke, because the person died. Look at your life and see how these things may be actually working, and it's not just a philosophy in a book.
Right, I had a thought about that. It's like buying a really expensive cookbook and just reading and looking at the pictures and saying, okay, I understand this, and never really getting down to the cooking. So if my evolutionary goal is to be a great cook, I can't just read the book. I have to read the book, I have to try, I have to fail, I have to experiment, I have to play, and then I can hopefully be a really good cook.
Yeah, so the secret doctrine is the cookbook.
Right, and our evolutionary goal is to get back to the oneness. All right, so the second part of this is based on that realization that you gained from watching your desires, watching things that are fleeting, is to now kind of make it a little more concrete. So keep a general awareness of your desires. Whenever something unhealthy or inappropriate pops up, take a pause and give that some attention, give that some energy, give that some, oh, this is what's going on, and follow that thread. And then once...
and try to recognize that it's transitory. This is what happens when the desire is present. It is very demanding. But then when the desire will disappear, and if the desire is not appropriate, you may regret it later, and you say, why did I do that? Because the desire is gone. So it's important to go through the experience and recognize, not only with desires, with moods. Today I feel down, and then everything looks down, gray, or depressing. But if you realize everything is transitory, tomorrow you may feel completely different. So if you do something right now, just because you believe that the mood you are in right now is how reality is, then you will regret it tomorrow. If you understand that these things are transitory, then you can pause. You don't need to just act out the mood, the desire, etc.
So what we're doing here is we're gaining right knowledge. So from reading the secret doctrine, from, doing these classes, we're gaining the knowledge of the background knowledge of this is what it is. This is why it's happening. Well, now this is our practice. So now we take what's applied to universal or to the whole, and we're taking it now into our own personal lives. We're looking at our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, our needs, our, whatever is within our personality. And then we're taking a look at it and we're naming it. We're saying, yes, this is transitory. Yes, this came up. And I think sometimes what we do is if we have the same mood day in, day out at a particular time, we think we attach permanence to it. But if we look at it from a bigger picture, if I'm angry every day, then I think that anger is a permanent part of my personality. But if I see that there are moments, all other moments in between that anger, then I can say, okay, wait a minute. Let's take a look at this. and let's put it into a little bit different perspective.
Mhm.
So once we do that, if you give in to the desire, that's okay. Be fully aware of the whole process. And that's a whole meditation or a whole practice in itself is giving it your full attention and giving it everything you have just to watch it playfully as.
Yeah, because basically we keep doing the same things because we don't pay attention. I don't know, typical example, you overeat something that you like, then you have a stomach ache, and then we don't pay attention to that. We take a pill to make it disappear, and then we will keep doing the same. If you stay with the stomach ache, then there is something that in your consciousness learns. We have to deal with the consequences. If we keep skipping the consequences, then we keep doing the same. But we are trained to escape suffering instead of working with the suffering. So look at the desire, be aware of it. Look at what it leads you to, be aware when you cut the big piece of cake, when you eat it, how it is pleasant, how the pleasure disappears soon, how pain comes out of that. If you go through the whole thing with full awareness, the experience itself teaches you, and little by little you transcend the desire by experience, not just by repression.
Okay, daily situations. Do you want me to read this whole thing?
Yeah, I don't remember what that
Okay.
is.
Start by pondering over the fact that as divine spirits, we are eternal and unchanging. When we leave the body behind at death, the short physical life we just finished is seen as a passing dream. The dream is not meaningless. The experiences acquired in it help us realize our true nature. However, after all is said and done, we as a soul move forward, taking with us what we have learned, the bonds of love we have forged, and forgetting everything else. So this is a wide view where we're looking at how this applies to this whole lifetime. And to me, this kind of puts into perspective the question of death. If we can take from that wider view and bring it into then maybe instead of taking it as a lifetime, take it into what is our daily, every day we go to sleep, which is kind of a death of that day. And we reawaken in the morning to a new day. So we can look at it that way. And I think that's what it can do is help to take away that fear of death, because we're doing, or each activity or each moment has that cycle, has a lifetime, has a birth, a lifetime, and a death. And so we're practicing dying on a regular basis.
Yeah, that Krishnamurti would talk about that frequently. Can you die during the day to different things? I mean, you dealt with something, can you die to that? Leave it behind. That you don't need to dwell on that, keep dwelling on that, whether it was something good or bad or neutral. That would be a practical application throughout the day. The other way of working with this exercise is taking your whole life, the personal life as the illusion, as the evolutionary pilgrimage, and you as a soul as the eternal, as the real. So how do you look at your life from the point of a soul? You as a soul are going to incarnate in another Manvantara, in another lifetime, and you will forget everything that happened in this lifetime. What theosophical literature tells us that is left is the essential experience, your learning, your development. So what things really matter, the links that you established with people, whether through hate or love. We meet again people that we had a loving relationship, or that we have an unresolved relationship.
Strong.
So look at life from that perspective, and what matters to you as a soul, as the real, let's say, from your transitory pilgrimage through the unreal, through the illusion. And that's also an important exercise. You start seeing things in a different perspective.
Experiment with taking the situations you go through in life as they were a transitory dream. Let your personality engage with the activities that life brings, but keep in mind their essential unreality. If it is as if you were playing a game or acting out a character in a story, you accept the rules or the script, act accordingly, but never forget that this is just a game or a play, which will soon end while the real you remains.
So here again, that's why we added these slides. Normally, because we have more of the Eastern view, we tend to think that when we say life is a dream, we mean is meaningless. It is a very important dream. You know, if you have watched the movie like The Matrix, the main character there would learn how to fight. You know, it was an action movie in a virtual reality. So that reality is not real. There is a little dialogue between the teacher and this character where, you know, says, do you think this is real? Do you think you are breathing here, breathing hard because they were fighting in the training? This is not real. This is in your mind. However, when he comes out of that training virtual reality, he knew how to fight, for example. So the soul, again, there is a purpose for the soul to be here. But nevertheless, this is like a dream, like a virtual reality. So if if you get hit in that virtual reality, you are not really getting hit in your physical body. Of course, the movie, to make it more interesting, they say if your mind believes it, then you transfer it to the physical body. If you are dying in the virtual reality, you die in reality. That's to make the movie more interesting. But basically, the idea here is, can you go through life as if this was a game or a play? You know, a serious actor takes very seriously the play and tries to play, you know, as faithfully as possible. And when he's running away from somebody that is chasing him, you know, or her, he's doing it, but in his mind, he knows, I'm not really being chased in reality. So there is like that double understanding where we can engage with life, we can understand that life is valuable, but at the same time, we know this is not really happening at the level of the soul. I don't know if I'm explaining it, you know,
No, and
clearly enough.
I was just going to add, in our dreams, there is the possibility of, when we realize what our dreams are, there is the possibility of being more aware of our dreams, or being aware that it is a dream, and kind of interacting in the sense that we don't fully engage. And that's what we're talking about on the physical plane also. We can, with the right view, we can view life as okay, this is happening, but we don't get fully engaged where if I'm running, that that fear factor doesn't come up in my dream that a lion's really going to eat me.
Yeah.
So
I'm fully engaged. Again, all these words are so inadequate
imperfect.
because, you know, Annie Besant was a social activist, and she fought for this and for that. Annie Blavatsky was even in a war when she was young in Italy, you know, trying to help for the liberation of Italy. So not being fully engaged is at the level of wisdom. This is the game. I will play it to the fullest of my ability. I will be responsible. I will do it rightly. But at the level of wisdom, this is a game, an important game, necessary game, but this is a game. You know, maybe that
Right.
can help.
Yeah, that does help. And it made me think too that what we were talking about in here, oh, when you said die to it, you know, that's what we're trying to do. Starting when you're in a crisis with these activities is not the best time to start. So we can start with these, with the daily irritations, or even
challenges,
or even we seem to negate, not negate, but ignore the happy times. You know, we just fall into a trance almost, then just let the happy times roll. But if we take these activities and just apply to them, or that detachment from the negative things, we can also apply it to the positive things that happen. And that might be I don't know, it might be harder to have the space in there.
Yeah, again, the detachment doesn't mean that we don't feel. It means you keep the right perspective. The Buddha said you cannot have pleasure without having pain. If you choose to be attached to pleasure, you will be attached to pain. These are two wheels in a carriage that go together. And Besant would talk about that, there is a pendulum kind of
Right.
phenomena. There is something we have to realize. There is something that is far more satisfactory than pleasure, and that is this poised, peaceful, contentment attitude that doesn't swing between pleasure and pain. So Besant would say what Michelle was saying. Even when there are the good times, the happy times, you can feel the joy, the happiness, it's all fine, but do not give undue importance to them. Do not get attached to them if you want to be free from the other side of manifestation. So it's this attitude of equanimity where you feel the joy, you feel the sorrow, but somehow you are beyond them, even though you feel them. There is a place of equilibrium and poise where you are coming from.
Okay, I believe.
Yeah, we went
Yep.
through that.
So that's it. Our email address is down below. If we don't get your question answered, or if one comes up after we close out. So info@fohaproductions.com. You can always email us with those questions and we'll get them answered.
Yeah, there were some people that perhaps couldn't participate live in one or the other session. If you have a question, you can always write
Right.
to us there.
Okay, there are a couple questions.
From Suzanne, where is Akasha on the diagram at the beginning of the second session?
Mm-hmm.
Cosmos, human constitution, and mind.
It should be,
No, at the beginning of the second session. She
oh,
said.
the second session
Yeah.
of today.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Which diagram?
Yeah, the previous one, let's say. So Akasha would be at the level of manas. In that case, would be both higher and lower. Normally, Akasha, if we take the first logos as the first plane, if we do this in a different way, like the absolute would be the space within which all the other planes manifest. Akasha is normally the third principle. The first logos or absolute, let's say it's the first. Then the second logos or alaya or swabhavat is the second. And then Akasha, the third logos, is the third. So you can correlate that with Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Akasha is at the level of the higher mind or the universal mind from a cosmic perspective. It's the third principle, Blavatsky says. And then, of course, sometimes Blavatsky takes everything that comes down as different manifestations of Akasha. But Akasha in its origin is on the third plane.
Okay, from Fiona. By meditating, we will become more in contact with our intuition, so we can develop a more natural sense of what's important, our own sense of oneness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the intuition works. Blavatsky made a difference between sensory perception and intuition. Sensory perception is seeing something, whether you see it with your physical eyes, with your astral eyes, with your mental eyes. And she would say, as long as you are acting through senses, that doesn't ensure that you will relate correctly to what you are perceiving. You can see auras, on the astral plane, you can see thought forms. That doesn't ensure that you will know how to take life in the correct way, that you will develop wisdom, love, etc. The spiritual perception acts more from the background. It begins to transform the way you relate and perceive life. So it's like this certainty. It's not that you see unity as if unity was an object, and then you say, now I'm enlightened. Little by little, you feel more the unity, or you feel less the separation first. You feel more certain that the eternal is real and that this is passing. You feel more confident going through this because you understand that this is not the ultimately real. So the intuition manifests in those ways.
Okay.
Any other comment or question? So basically, we hope with this class to do a couple of things. First, to present some essential concepts in the secret doctrine. The idea is that if you understand these basic foundations, then you can go to the secret doctrine and start studying it by yourself. And second, to show how the secret doctrine can be interpreted in this psychological way, emphasizing the need for us to make it practical, to make it applicable to our lives, which is, as we saw in the first class, what the masters and Blavatsky really expected, and to use it also to develop our spiritual intuition, not just go to the book to memorize some concepts and be able to give a lecture about it, but use it to stimulate your spiritual intuition. So I think that's more or less the summing up of the whole thing. Tomorrow, we will have a program that will be 2 hours in the morning and then a break for lunch, and then 2 hours in the afternoon, where we are going to use techniques of meditation on these subjects. So we will see the meditation aspect of this work. So if you want to register, you can write to Annie or Rochelle.
Annie, it's
Annie's
school
the-
registrar.
School info is easier.
Okay, schoolinfo@crotonainstitute.org. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, thank
Annie,
you,
Rochelle,
Crotona.
Maria. Yeah, thank
Yes.
you all for making this possible.